The Galactic Empire had long ruled over the galaxy with absolute authority. For centuries, its vast fleet of starships and advanced technology had crushed any opposition, from distant alien species to rebellious planets. The Emperor, Galdros, watched from his imposing citadel as planets fell under his iron grip, each one more subdued than the last. For him, it was simple. Power was absolute, and submission was inevitable. The humans, with their relatively primitive technology, had been no exception. They had quietly fallen under the Empire's control, with no resistance strong enough to challenge their dominance. Then, everything changed. It began on an ordinary day, or so it seemed. The human colonies on the farthest edge of the galaxy were preparing for a new round of negotiations with the Empire. Talks were meant to solidify their control over the humans, perhaps even offer them the illusion of autonomy. A small group of Empire diplomats, accompanied by elite officers, were scheduled to meet with human representatives in a neutral system, an isolated star system, far from both human and Empire-controlled territories. But just as the meeting was about to begin, a transmission arrived. It wasn't the standard encrypted communication from the human diplomats or the Empire's military outpost. This transmission was unexpected. It came from deep space, from a previously unknown source. The message was short, just a few words, but the impact was immediate. Asterisk humans don't negotiate with murderers. Asterisk. It was a warning, a challenge. The message was broadcast in multiple languages, including those used by the Galactic Empire. And within moments, it reverberated across the Empire's communication channels. Silence fell in the room of the Imperial Council, where Emperor Galdros and his most trusted advisors were gathered. The leaders of the Empire had heard many things before: complaints, threats, the occasional rebellious outburst. But this was different. There was no signature, no identification. The message appeared to be a direct statement to the Empire, bold and unapologetic. Its simple truth was like a slap to the face of Galdros himself. Murderers. That word, so blunt and direct, shook him to the core. It was a word he had heard used against his empire countless times, but to hear it aimed at the most powerful force in the galaxy was unsettling. For a brief moment, Galdros was speechless. How dare anyone question the might of the Empire? How could anyone speak so openly against them, especially now, when humanity was at its mercy? But as the shock began to wear off, Galdros' face hardened. This was no random message. Someone somewhere had planned this, and they had done it with a purpose. He turned to his advisors. Find the source. Immediately. His voice was cold, demanding. He would not tolerate insubordination, and this message was the highest form of disrespect. It was an insult, not just to the Empire, but to him personally. Someone had dared to challenge his authority, and he would find out who and why before the day was done. But as the officers scrambled to analyze the transmission's origin, Galdros felt a rising sense of unease. This was no mere resistance. This was something more. This continuation of Part 1 introduces the core conflict, showing the Empire's initial shock and the first signs of the growing rebellion. It sets the stage for the rest of the story, creating a strong sense of mystery and danger surrounding the human challenge. The Empire's most trusted intelligence officers worked tirelessly to locate the source of the mysterious message. For days, the usual chatter of galactic diplomacy was overshadowed by this one alarming transmission. High-ranking Imperial officers in their sleek, dark uniforms sat hunched over terminals in the Empire's central command, scanning through endless streams of encrypted data. But no matter how deeply they dug, the trail seemed to vanish into the void. The source was elusive, hidden in a region of space long ignored by the Empire's surveillance systems. This section of the galaxy, known as the Edge, had been written off as a quiet, uninhabited area. What the Empire didn't know was that the region was far from empty. For years, a clandestine group known as the Coalition of Free Worlds had been operating in secrecy. Born out of frustration with the Empire's reign of terror, the Coalition was an alliance of various systems, some human, some not, that had managed to slip through the Empire's grasp. They had no desire to conquer, no interest in overthrowing galactic power for power's sake. They simply wanted one thing: freedom. They wanted a galaxy where the Empire's reach didn't strangle every corner of existence. The Coalition was a disparate group of planets, moons, and colonies, all united by their hatred of the Empire's cruelty. They had long operated in the shadows, communicating in secret, using old and forgotten technologies to evade detection. They had learned to hide themselves from the Empire's prying eyes, working together to build their forces in the shadows. Now their efforts had finally reached a tipping point. The message to the Empire was their declaration of intent. As the search for the transmission source continued, a breakthrough came. A young officer, barely out of his academy training, stumbled across something unexpected in the Empire's deep space databases. An obscure, long-dormant frequency, one that had never been used in centuries, had recently been reactivated. It was a relic of an ancient communication method, one so old it had been nearly forgotten. The frequency had been used by the Coalition to send the warning, carefully chosen because of its ability to evade modern Empire tracking systems. The officer's discovery confirmed the worst fears of the Empire. The message had come from an organized, well-coordinated force. The Coalition of Free Worlds had successfully infiltrated human-controlled territories, spreading their influence and gaining allies, many of whom were from distant planets that had suffered under the Empire's rule. Worse, this wasn't just some small-scale rebellion. The Coalition had a network, and they had a plan. Emperor Galdros, upon hearing this news, seethed with rage. It was one thing for a rogue planet or rebel group to challenge his authority, but a coordinated galaxy-wide network, it was an entirely new level of threat. "Bring me everything on this coalition," Galdros demanded. "I want every piece of information on their leadership, their resources, and their goals. I will not let a group of rebels disrupt the order of the galaxy." But there was more at stake than just the Coalition's growing power. What the Empire didn't know was that the Coalition had not only been preparing in the shadows, they had also been in contact with the humans. The human colonies had become the linchpin in their grand design. With the humans now fully aware of the Empire's atrocities and its reach, they were no longer passive subjects. They had become the heart of the rebellion. The Empire's greatest mistake, Emperor Galdros realized too late, was underestimating the resilience of the humans. What had begun as a faint whisper in the void was now a roar that the Empire could not ignore. And the warning, "Humans don't negotiate with murderers," was not just a message, it was a battle cry. This part expands on the mysterious nature of the Coalition and builds tension as the Empire realizes it is facing a far more organized and dangerous threat than it originally thought. It also subtly introduces the importance of the human colonies in this growing resistance, setting the stage for future conflict. On Earth, the transmission from the mysterious Coalition had struck a chord. The words "humans don't negotiate with murderers" echoed across the globe, resonating deeply with every human who had long suffered under the Empire's iron fist. What had started as a cryptic message now became a rallying cry. It was no longer just a warning. It was a declaration, one that awakened a fire in humanity that the Empire had long underestimated. Admiral Celine Drake, a seasoned strategist and former leader in Earth's military forces, was the first to see the potential in the message. Known for her sharp mind and unwavering determination, she had watched as her people were slowly ground down by the Empire's oppressive laws and brutal military presence. But Celine had always believed in humanity's strength, even when the odds seemed impossible. When the message arrived, Celine was in her private office, reviewing military reports. Her eyes flicked across the words on her screen, and for a moment, everything around her went silent. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the meaning behind them that struck her. The Empire had done unspeakable things to countless worlds, but humans had borne the brunt of it for too long. It was time to fight back, not just for Earth, but for every colony that had fallen under the Empire's oppressive rule. She immediately called together a secret meeting of the human leadership, composed of military officers, influential leaders, and key figures from across the human colonies. In a small, dimly lit room, Selene addressed them, her voice steady, but filled with a quiet passion that made her words impossible to ignore. "We've lived under the boot of the Empire long enough," Selene said, her eyes meeting theirs. "We've seen what they're capable of, how they destroy everything in their path. But we are not their subjects. We are not weak. This is our galaxy, and it's time we took it back." Her words ignited a fire among them. One by one, the leaders pledged their support, understanding that this wasn't just a fight for freedom, it was a fight for survival. The human colonies, once divided and fragmented, now stood united. Earth, the heart of humanity, was ready to rise up, and the Empire would soon know the strength of those they had thought to control. News of Selene's movement spread like wildfire across human settlements, from Mars to the farthest colonies on the Outer Rim. While the majority of humans had lived in relative peace under the Empire's rule, there was a growing resentment among the people. The message from the Coalition had given them a voice, a cause, and above all, hope. For the first time in years, they had something to fight for. Within days, human forces mobilized. Stealth ships, hidden for years, were brought out of their hiding places, ready to strike when the time came. Weapons that had been developed in secret, some even more advanced than the Empire's own, were distributed across the colonies. The rebellion had no intention of playing by the Empire's rules. They would fight with everything they had, using cunning, innovation, and sheer determination to challenge their oppressors. Admiral Drake became the face of this new resistance. Her strategies, born from years of experience, began to shape the rebellion's efforts. As she stood before a gathering of human forces, she spoke words that would become legendary. "The Empire believes we are weak," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "They think they can break us, but they will learn that we are not afraid. We are not negotiators. We are fighters, and we will make them regret underestimating us." The human resistance, now united under Selene's leadership, was born. The battle for the galaxy had begun, and the humans were ready to prove that they would not bend to the will of the Empire. The Empire had awakened a force they could not control. The war for freedom was no longer just a distant dream. It was happening now. This continuation builds on the human response to the message and highlights Admiral Selene Drake's rise as a leader. It sets the stage for the human resistance to gather strength, prepare for battle, and begin their fight against the Empire with unity and determination. Emperor Galdros sat in his Grand Council chamber, his fists clenched at his sides. The holographic projection before him displayed the human colony scattered across the galaxy, now marked with red alerts. The coalition of free worlds had become more than just a nuisance. It had become a legitimate threat, and the warning they had sent was only the beginning. The Empire's intelligence had managed to piece together enough information to confirm their worst fear. The humans had begun to mobilize. But it was not just the Coalition's involvement that rattled Galdros. It was the sheer audacity of the humans. They had never posed a serious challenge before. Earth, with its resources and newfound leadership, was leading the charge. The words from Admiral Selene Drake, the voice of the human rebellion, rang in his ears. We are not negotiators. We are fighters. She had united the fractured human colonies, turning them into a cohesive force ready to resist the might of the Empire. "We will crush them," Galdros muttered under his breath, the fire of anger burning in his eyes. "We will show them what happens when they defy the Empire." The Emperor ordered his fleet to begin preparations for the largest military campaign humanity had ever witnessed. The Imperial fleet, vast and nearly invincible, was ready to bring its full force to bear against the human colonies. Their goal was simple: to break the rebellion in one swift, overwhelming strike. Every human world, from Earth to the outermost colonies, would feel the full weight of imperial retribution. For weeks, the Empire's ships mobilized, sending reinforcements and warships to the most critical locations. The Empire had a fleet larger than anything the humans could ever dream of matching, and they planned to use that advantage to their fullest. Geldros believed that once the rebellion was crushed, humanity would fall back into submission. The humans would see the futility of their resistance and would fall into line, as all other civilizations had done before them. But the rebellion was not going to be so easily silenced. In the hidden recesses of the human resistance, new technology was being developed, weapons that the Empire had never encountered. Using a combination of human ingenuity and knowledge gained from the Coalition's secretive network, the rebels had developed stealth technology that could allow ships to disappear from the Empire's radar. It was an unpredictable advantage, and the Empire was woefully unprepared for it. The first signs of the human resistance were felt when a small but formidable fleet ambushed a fleet of Imperial supply ships on the edge of human-controlled space. Using their cloaked vessels, they struck without warning. The attack was swift and devastating. The Empire's forces, once sure of their dominance, were caught off guard by the humans' precision and their willingness to fight dirty. For the first time, the Empire began to doubt its invincibility. Geldros had underestimated the humans. The rebellion was not just a ragtag group of civilians and soldiers. It was an organized, resourceful force. The humans had learned how to fight in the shadows, how to use their limitations as advantages. And as the Empire's fleets began to suffer unexpected losses, Geldros felt the first stirrings of doubt creeping into his mind. "Prepare for more," Geldros commanded, his voice icy with fury. "This will be the last time we are caught off guard." But even as the Empire readied its counteroffensive, the humans were not idle. Every skirmish, every loss only strengthened their resolve. They had proven they could strike hard and fast, and they would not stop until the Empire had been brought to its knees. This part builds the growing tension between the Empire and the humans as the Empire prepares its massive counterattack. It highlights the unexpected effectiveness of the human resistance and sets the stage for further conflict, showing how the Empire is beginning to falter under the weight of the rebellion's determination. The war between the Galactic Empire and the human resistance had reached a tipping point. Despite the Empire's overwhelming military strength, the humans, under the leadership of Admiral Celine Drake, had turned the tide in ways no one could have predicted. The Empire's vast fleets had been stretched thin, and what had once seemed like a straightforward victory was now proving to be a struggle for survival. The rebels were no longer just defending their worlds. They were taking the fight to the Empire. Celine had carefully orchestrated a series of tactical strikes that had crippled key supply lines, forcing the Empire to divert resources and troops to defend vulnerable sectors. The Empire's advanced technologies, which had once seemed unbeatable, were now being exploited by the humans in clever, unexpected ways. Using a mix of guerrilla tactics and newfound stealth technologies, the humans struck quickly, withdrew just as swiftly, and disappeared before the Empire could retaliate. On the front lines, morale among Imperial troops was beginning to wane. Soldiers who had once fought without question were now questioning their orders. They had come to believe that they were fighting for a righteous cause. The Empire had always told them that they were the bringers of order, the shield against chaos. But now they were unsure. The humans, they realized, were not the primitive, helpless species they had been led to believe. The humans fought with ferocity, with desperation, and with an ingenuity that was beginning to wear down even the most seasoned Imperial officers. Meanwhile, the human resistance was gaining strength every day. More planets, once hesitant to join the rebellion, were now openly aligning themselves with the coalition of free worlds. The image of the Empire's brutality, its attempts to crush dissent with ruthless force, had inspired many neutral systems to take a stand. The rebellion's message was simple: if the Empire could not be trusted to protect the people, then it was time for the people to protect themselves. On Earth, the resolve to fight back had turned into a fervor. People who had once been content to live under the Empire's rule now rallied behind the flag of rebellion. Soldiers, engineers, scientists, and civilians all pitched in, contributing their skills to the cause. The human ingenuity that had once been relegated to peaceful advancements in technology was now being harnessed for war. New weapons were developed, some even surpassing the Empire's own, giving the rebellion the edge it had once lacked. Admiral Drake stood before a war table, surrounded by her most trusted commanders. The plan was set. They would take the fight to the Empire's heart, the very seat of power. The humans had been patient, fighting back in small skirmishes, avoiding large-scale confrontations with the Empire's fleet. But now, the time had come to strike directly at the core of the Empire's military might. The Empire would be forced to see the strength of the humans and their resolve to be free. "We've shifted the balance of power," Celine said, her voice steady but filled with purpose. "The Empire thinks it can defeat us by brute force, but they're wrong. It's not just their strength that will break them. It's their arrogance. They never saw us coming. And now, we'll take everything from them." With that, the human resistance, emboldened and empowered, prepared to launch their most daring attack yet. They were no longer the underdogs, struggling to survive. They were a force in their own right, capable of challenging the Empire for the fate of the galaxy. This part shows the momentum shifting in favor of the human resistance. Their clever tactics and unyielding spirit have begun to weaken the Empire, with new allies and a surge of power behind them. The rebellion is no longer an underdog, but a growing force that threatens the Empire's very foundation. The time for small skirmishes and covert strikes had passed. The human resistance, emboldened by their recent successes and the growing support of once neutral systems, was now preparing for their boldest move yet, an assault on the Empire's heart, its central command. The Emperor's citadel on the planet Korath, a fortress surrounded by layers of Imperial defense, was the nerve center of the entire galaxy's military operations. If the humans could strike here, they would deal a blow to the Empire from which it might never recover. Admiral Celine Drake stood before a map of Korath, her gaze hard and focused. Her strategy was simple but risky. Infiltrate the planet's orbital defenses with a stealth fleet, disable the planetary shields, and then strike at the citadel itself. The Empire's resources were stretched thin after weeks of resistance attacks, but Korath was still heavily fortified. The odds were steep, but Celine's belief in her people and their cause was unwavering. "We can't afford hesitation," she said, addressing the gathered commanders in the command room. "This is our moment. We take Korath, and we make the Empire feel what we felt for centuries. It's time to show them that the galaxy is no longer theirs to command." The fleet she had assembled was a mixture of human ships and coalition reinforcements. There were no grand banners or speeches, no fanfare, just the resolve of fighters who had suffered under the Empire's rule for far too long. The human resistance had learned that stealth and speed were their greatest weapons, and they would use them to full effect. The Empire's eyes were on the outer systems, where the rebellion had launched its smaller raids. Few expected a direct strike at Korath, and that was the advantage the humans needed. As the fleet entered the Korath system under the cover of darkness, the Empire's sensors failed to detect their approach. The human ships, equipped with advanced cloaking technology, moved like shadows through the stars. Celine watched as her fleet moved into position, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the command table. Every moment counted. "Initiate the attack," Celine ordered. At once, the fleet launched a series of precisely timed strikes. Bombers swarmed the orbital defense platforms, their stealth tech rendering them nearly invisible as they dropped explosive payloads that disabled the planetary shields. Within minutes, the blockade that had once protected Korath began to crumble. The Empire's forces were slow to respond, caught off guard by the sudden ferocity of the assault. Meanwhile, a smaller elite team led by Celine herself made their way toward the citadel. The plan was to infiltrate the heart of the Empire's military command and capture or neutralize the leaders within. The resistance had prepared for every contingency, but they knew the risks. Failure would mean the complete destruction of the rebellion, but success would cripple the Empire in ways that were unimaginable. As the human forces breached the Citadel's outer defenses, the Imperial leaders inside were forced to make decisions they never thought they would have to face. The walls of the Emperor's citadel were no longer impregnable. The rebellion had come to Korath, and the battle for the Empire's heart was underway. But even as they advanced, the rebels knew the stakes. This was not just a military operation. It was a statement, a declaration that the Empire would never again dictate the fate of the galaxy. This part of the story depicts the human resistance's bold and strategic assault on the Empire's core, signaling a turning point in the conflict. The use of stealth and precision underscores the growing power of the rebellion, and the focus on Korath, the seat of Imperial power, heightens the tension and stakes of the mission. The humans' resolve to make a statement and shift the balance of power becomes clear as they take on the heart of the Empire. The chaos that erupted within the citadel on Korath was unimaginable. The once imposing fortress, a symbol of the Empire's unyielding power, was now under siege. The human resistance, led by Admiral Celine Drake, had breached its outer defenses with shocking precision, and their forces had already begun infiltrating the heart of the Empire's military command. Korath's once impenetrable walls now seemed fragile in the face of the rebellion's unrelenting assault. Celine moved swiftly through the corridors, her team of elite soldiers flanking her at every turn. Their mission was clear: neutralize the key Imperial leaders, including Grand General Thalos, the mastermind behind many of the Empire's most brutal campaigns. Taking him out would send a message that the rebellion wasn't just a fleeting resistance. It was a force capable of shaking the very foundations of Imperial control. The corridors were eerily silent as the team advanced, their footsteps muffled by the thick, sterile carpeting of the citadel. Celine's thoughts raced, her mind calculating each move, each potential danger. She couldn't afford to make a single mistake. The future of the galaxy depended on this operation. As they neared the central command room, a wave of Imperial soldiers rushed toward them. The doors to the command room were heavily guarded, but Celine was ready. She signaled her team to fall into formation, and in an instant, blaster fire filled the air. The Empire's soldiers, though well-trained, were no match for the humans' swift and tactical strikes. The Resistance had learned how to fight efficiently, and their stealth technology and guerrilla tactics had given them the upper hand. Within moments, the hallway was cleared, and the doors to the command room were breached. Inside, Grand General Thalos stood at the center of a holographic map, surrounded by his most trusted officers. His stern expression faltered as the blast doors exploded inward, revealing Celine and her team. The Imperial officer's eyes narrowed, recognizing the Resistance leader at once. He had heard whispers of the humans' growing power, but seeing them here, inside the heart of the Empire, was something he had never anticipated. "You dare breach my command?" Thalos growled, drawing his blaster. Celine stepped forward, her voice cold and steady. "Your Empire's reign is over, Thalos. This is your last stand." Without another word, the battle began. Thalos and his officers were skilled fighters, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Celine's team, trained for such confrontations, quickly took control of the room. Blaster fire erupted, and in a blur of motion, the Resistance overwhelmed the Imperial soldiers. Thalos, realizing the tide had turned, fought valiantly to the end, but he was ultimately overpowered. The general's blaster fell to the floor, and Celine stood over him, her expression unwavering. "You're done," she said, as her team secured him and his officers. Outside, the battle raged on as human forces continued to push deeper into the citadel. The Imperial defenses, once seen as impenetrable, were crumbling under the pressure of the rebellion's unyielding assault. The Empire's grip on Korath was slipping, and with it, the core of its power. As Selene stood over Tholos, she felt the weight of the moment. They had struck at the heart of the Empire, and it had begun to bleed. The fall of Korath marked the beginning of the end for the Galactic Empire. No longer could it claim dominance over the galaxy. The humans had proven they would no longer kneel. The fight had shifted permanently. This part marks the critical moment when the human resistance, led by Admiral Selene Drake, successfully infiltrates the core of Imperial power, striking down one of the Empire's most feared leaders. It is a major turning point in the war, symbolizing the fall of Korath and the beginning of the Empire's eventual collapse. The human forces now have a foothold in the heart of the Empire, and their message is clear. The rebellion is unstoppable. The fall of Korath sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The Empire, once thought invincible, was reeling from the unprecedented assault. The destruction of the Citadel, the capture of Grand General Tholos, and the collapse of its central military command were the first signs of a far-reaching revolution. The rebellion had done what seemed impossible. They had struck at the heart of the Empire and made it bleed. Now the question was no longer if the Empire would fall, but when On Earth, celebrations erupted. The news of Korath's fall spread like wildfire, igniting hope in every corner of the human colonies. The people, who had long lived in the shadow of the Empire's oppressive rule, began to believe in the impossible. The once distant dream of freedom now felt within reach. But Admiral Selene Drake, who stood at the center of this monumental victory, knew that the battle was far from over. The Empire was wounded, but it was not dead. They would retaliate. The question was how and when. In the wake of Korath's fall, Selene called a war council. The human resistance had gained an unprecedented victory, but now they needed to decide on the next steps. The Empire would certainly regroup, and it was only a matter of time before they launched a counterattack. They needed to capitalize on the momentum they had gained, but it couldn't be business as usual. The stakes were too high. "We have broken their core," Selene said, her voice calm but resolute as she addressed her commanders. "But they're not done yet. We forced their hand. Now we push forward. We take the fight to every corner of their empire and make it impossible for them to regroup. We finish what we started." There was no hesitation in her words, no uncertainty. Her resolve was unwavering, and the resistance forces rallied behind her. This was a moment they had all worked for, fought for, and sacrificed for. It was no longer just about fighting for survival. It was about dismantling an empire that had enslaved the galaxy for far too long. In the weeks that followed, the human resistance expanded its reach. The success at Korath inspired other systems to rise up, joining the coalition of free worlds. Formerly neutral planets, who had once feared the Empire's wrath, now openly rebelled, throwing off their chains. The Empire's once mighty fleet, though still formidable, struggled to contain the growing tide of resistance. Selene's forces moved with purpose, striking at Imperial supply lines, taking out key military infrastructure, and liberating planets that had long been under the Empire's oppressive rule. Each victory was a spark, and the rebellion began to spread like wildfire across the galaxy. However, the Empire was far from finished. Emperor Galdros, furious at the loss of Korath, began to make desperate plans. He knew the resistance could not be ignored any longer. The rebellion had to be crushed once and for all, or it would grow into something the Empire couldn't stop. In the heart of his war room, Galdros turned to his generals, his face a mask of rage. "We will not lose to these rebels. We will show them the full power of the Empire," he snarled, his eyes burning with fury. But even as he spoke, deep in the corridors of Imperial power, a new resistance was forming. One led not by soldiers, but by those who had once believed in the Empire's ideals. The galaxy had reached a crossroads, and the age of the Empire was beginning to crumble. The dawn of a new era had arrived. This final part completes the arc of the human resistance's triumph and sets the stage for the continuing struggle. The Empire is reeling, but not defeated, and the rebellion, though victorious, faces an uncertain future. It marks the dawn of a new era in the galaxy, one where the Empire's hold is slipping, and the possibility of true freedom for the galaxy seems closer than ever before.